In this puzzle, white has a king in a7 and a rook in a6. Black has a king in c7 and two pawns, one in g3 and one in f4. Right, white has to be accurate in his moves here if he wants to win. To start, he has to play rook to g6. So after rook to g6, black cannot push any of his pawns. Pushing the f pawn will lose the g pawn, and eventually white is got time enough to go to f3 and then pick up the pawn at the end. And obviously he cannot push the g pawn because he gets taken right away. So so black player now plays king to d7, and now the key move is rook to g4. It's very simple. Rook to g4 stays on the g file, controlling the g pawn, and at the same time threatens a pawn. Now, none of the pawns can actually move. So, the only idea that black could have is either to push the g pawn or the king. Now, pushing the king loses because black can just take the f pawn, and then he's got time to pick up the g pawn as well. And if black plays g2 with the idea of being taken, which is what happens, so that he can get his king closer and eventually force the rook to sacrifice while the king gets stuck next to his pawn, then in that case, then white has to play this move, rook g5. Now this is a great move. It controls the fifth rank, and so basically it doesn't allow the black king to go down, which means that now black cannot push the pawn because white rook can just reach g3 and threatens it, and the pawn has to move, and then rook f3 wins the pawn. Black king just doesn't make it in time to go and help, and if black moves the king, then the rook has to go to a5, still controlling the same rank, stopping the king from going anywhere close. And now the white rook is guarding the fifth rank, forcing the king to either move left or right, or the pawn to go down. Now king moving down doesn't help. King will just play to b6. The white king is getting closer, and now king can play d6 and lose the pawn next move, or he could play f6 with the white king getting closer and closer. Now black king to e6, and now white just plays a tempo move, rook to b5. Now black plays back and king follows, stopping the king now from reaching these three squares and creating an opposition. King is now forced to go to, let's say, g6. White wins the game. There will soon be two pieces attacking the pawn, no matter what black does. So white wins like that. Then if now here the second choice, which was even worse, was to push the pawn. Pushing the pawn creates 2 steps distance from his own king, allowing the rook to reach a3 and eventually capture the pawn. The king doesn't make it in time. If he pushes the pawn, the rook can reach f3 with check and forking the king and the pawn. In this puzzle, the white king is in h5 and the white rook in d5, the black king in e6, and the two black pawns in b4 and c4. The first move to start with for the white player if he wants to win is rook to c5. Now, moving the king here doesn't work because white can pick up the c pawn and the rook is guarding the c file, meaning that the king can't really get anywhere close. So then white can actually pick up the other pawn. Pushing doesn't work because of rook b4, and pushing the b4 also loses, because then the white player can pick up the c4 pawn, and then he's got time to get the other pawn too. So that now the only move that makes sense for the black player is pawn to c3. Now, unlike the previous puzzle, here something like rook c4 doesn't work, because the king is actually getting closer. The king is actually closer than he was before. So now, after king d5 and pushing the pawn, the king can play to c5, and now there's no way for the rook to capture the pawn just like that. He's gonna have to sacrifice the rook. Now obviously this is a terrible move because of king c4, or if rook were to try something like this, now black can just push the pawn, and the only move now for the white player is rook h1, and the king has got 2 steps enough to reach his pawn and force the white rook to sacrifice. So going back, now rook c4 doesn't work, white has to play king g4. Now black is in some sort of zugzwang. He cannot push the pawn because it gets taken, and he cannot push not even the b pawn, because white rook would pick up both pawns. So black plays king to d6, attacking the rook, and now the key move here is rook to c8. Now rook to c4 doesn't work because of king d5, as seen before. So rook c8 works because after king d5, now king f3, king d4, and now king e2. It was important for the king to get close to these pawns, since the position of the black king, it was like the previous example, was closer to his own pawns. This time our king was necessary to come into the action, and the white rook had to stay on the c file to safeguard from the greatest danger, which is the c pawn. Now the king is controlling these 2 crucial squares which prevent the king from getting closer. The black pawn cannot push to c2 because it gets taken, so b3 comes next. And now another move, if you want to pause the video, the move is rook to b8. Now if black pushes the c pawn, then white king plays to d2, controls the opposition, and the c pawn cannot promote. It gets taken straight away by the king. The black pawn cannot push forward because it gets taken by the rook. And if black were to play, say, pawn to b2, then king d1, easy. And now king to d3 loses to rook check. The king is still taking care of the opposition, and now the king can reach c2 and block both pawns. So now, as seen in some previous videos, rook gives a check, the king has to move, and now the rook has to play a tempo move. It's important not to pick up the pawn because of the promotion of the black pawn that forces the king to take, and then the king takes the rook with a draw. So now the important tempo move, something like rook to c7, just because now it's going to be black to move again, and he cannot reach the c file anymore. Black will have to move. Now every capture comes with check, so this is check. And now if king goes up, then king is able to pick up the pawn, and if king goes down, now the king will play rook to b3, guarding the b1 square. So going back here, the last option that black can look at is king to c4, still taking care of both of his pawns. And now the winning move for the white player is king to d1. Now if the black pawn were to push to b2, then king could just reach c2 and create the exact same situation that we've just seen. And if the black king were to, I don't know, play rook king to d3, then he just loses the pawn. And if he pushes the c pawn, then king can reach c1 Now pushing the pawn is not allowed, so black king can try some sort of king c3, which doesn't go anywhere because now white can just play the same tempo move, rook b7, and now the pawn cannot push because it gets taken by the rook. So say king c4, still controlling the square of the pawn, and now king b2, and king's got nowhere to go on the b file, and he's going to lose the pawn. He can't push the pawn, so he's got to move it. He's got to move his king again. Now king here, and every move comes with check, check, and now here we have a rook in h5 and a king in e5, while the opponent's king is in d3 and the two black pawns in b4 and c4. The move to start with here is rook to h3 check. Now, king cannot go up nor stay in the same rank. He's forced to go down, and he's got two main options, king to d2 or to c2. Let's look at king d2. Now, king to d4, and black uh, black's pawn is being threatened, so he has to play, for example, pawn to c3. But because of the opposition, now the rook can come to h2, giving a check, forcing the king on the last rank and allowing the white king from getting closer. Now the white king and the white rook have a nice cooperation on the second rank. So the black pawn here cannot reach this square, and this pawn in b is also failing because of king takes pawn in c3, and eventually also protecting b2 with the help of the rook. So now black has another option, king to c2, staying closer to his own pawns. Now white still continues with king d4, getting his king closer, important to the success of this situation because the rook on its own cannot make it. Now black plays pawn to c3. Here comes the check. King goes to b3. King b1 would have been wrong because of king d3. Now the king is guarding the c2 square together with the rook, meaning that the c pawn cannot push. Pushing the b pawn also loses because of king c3, and then the king controls b2. So the only option was king to b3 after the check in h2, and now also king d3 is the solution, guarding the c2 pawn together with the rook. Now the black player is forced to play something like king a3 and king c2. It can get checked, but then the king will take the pawn in c3 and still guard the b2 square. This pawn cannot move, and so if the king goes to a2 now, here now we need a nice move like rook to h1, stopping the king from going to the first rank. So the king is now either forced to go up, which gives checkmate, or pushing the b pawn, which allows white to play king takes, and now pawn to b2, and white is able to reach c2 with full control of the b1 square.